Point Pinos, Point Lobos, Point Sur. We can see this beauty. We can even hear the winds meet and smell the brine. But how does one catch such a moment? Perhaps in a phrase or in a brushstroke. Perhaps in a song or a story. Or in a photograph.
The invention of the camera has been around for a long time. There have been a lot of iterations of the camera, but the camera as we know it today was invented in 1816. And while there have been more than a few upgrades in technology since then, the basic principles of photography are still the same. In the DSLR Basics series, we're going to look at some of the older methods of photography and how it affects the way we shoot today. And in this video, we're talking about I.S.O. If you're new to my channel, thanks for watching. My name is Anthony and I make videos that I hope will teach and inspire you to make better videos. If that's something you're into, consider subscribing to this channel and hit that bell icon so you're notified every time I upload. This series is something that I've wanted to do for a while now. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are just getting into photography and video, and some of the terms and methods that we can use are confusing. I hope this series will sort of clear the air and leave you less confused and more inspired to go shoot something. This is one of at least 3 videos that I'll do in this series. I'm gonna upload one on shutter speed and one on aperture. Then I'll evaluate and see if people are really into it enough to make more videos on more specific topics. There are a few questions that come to mind when it comes to I.S.O, and I'll answer them in this video. First, what is I.S.O? Second, why I.S.O? I mean, like, what does that even stand for? And lastly, why do we even still use I.S.O? Why not use something like sensitivity or brightness or something like that? Let's start off with what is I.S.O? Basically, it's sensor sensitivity, meaning the higher your I.S.O, the brighter or more exposed your image is. But there are a few downsides to higher I.S.O. In fact, for most of the digital cameras today, the lower your I.S.O, the better the image. But for some cameras, it gets a bit confusing. More on that later.
Photography in one form or another exerts a great influence on our daily lives.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land, far from Canada, I was a young aspiring photographer. Me and my 35mm camera were gonna take over the world. Okay, not really, but I did shoot for my college paper on a 35mm film camera. That really makes me feel old. But we had to use something like this, which is 400 speed I.S.O film. This is undeveloped film. I have actually shot on this roll recently because I kind of enjoy shooting on film still. The standard is the same no matter what brand I buy. I can trust that 400 I.S.O will expose the same as 400 I.S.O in another brand. Same goes for 100, 800, 1600, or even 3200. Now, imagine a world where film is cutting-edge technology and people from all around the world are making this new thing. They all have a standard of telling people how sensitive to light it is, but they need non-tech people to understand. Well, that's exactly the circumstances before film was described in terms of I.S.O. There were various standards for sensitivity, so when a photographer would travel to a different region or a different country, they may have to buy film from a new standard. That led to a lot of confusion because 100 in one standard could equal 60 in another and 400 in another. That's where the International Standardization Organization stepped in and made a standard that all the major film companies got behind, like Kodak and Fuji. They adopted it and became the standard across all film. And it's the standard we still use today. In fact, that's why it's called I.S.O, for International Standardization Organization. It's a mouthful, but the problem now is that digital is not film. And so how do we know that 100 I.S.O for digital is the same as 100 I.S.O for film? And the short answer is that we don't. And it's kind of a rabbit trail topic that we could go deeper into, but I won't. Instead, let's talk about why using higher I.S.O is sometimes the worst thing you can do for your photos.
The photographic emulsion is made up of millions of tiny crystals. We want to talk about them for a few minutes in rather technical language, because on their peculiar properties is based the whole art of photography.
First, increasing I.S.O is the only one of the 3 ways to control lighting into your camera that doesn't affect blurriness. And that's actually good. You get more brightness without sacrificing how you wanted your image to look. But when we increase I.S.O, we introduce more noise to the photo. In film photography, to get higher ISO, you had to physically change the film. You see, the way film was made is by placing crystals inside of a gelatin film.
This picture shows how the crystals actually look when magnified several thousand times.
Those crystals absorb light, and when exposed to it, they produce something called a negative.
When you look at an object in real life, the brain at number 1 receives an image of it through the eye. In photography, the object is imaged by a lens on a light-sensitive film at 3. The exposure period produces a latent image on the film at 4. A visible negative image is formed at 5. Light shines through the negative and falls upon another light-sensitive film at 6 and produces a latent image at 7. The developing and fixing of the film reveal a permanent image at 8. Therefore, when this positive image at 9 is illuminated, the brain at 10 again sees an image which is a faithful reproduction of that obtained from the original subject.
To make higher ISO film, the film manufacturers put bigger crystals onto that gelatin film. That means that there are physically less crystals on a sheet of film, making them saturate faster and causing a look that most people describe as grainy. This look can actually be desired as an artistic style. On the digital end of the spectrum, though, we have pixels that are printed in perfect alignment. When we increase the sensitivity of those pixels, they become inconsistent in the way that they receive the light. This is referred to as digital noise, and no one really likes digital noise. In higher-end digital cameras like the new Sony A7S III, this problem isn't as prevalent, but it does still exist. So when you're adjusting your ISO, it's something you'll need to watch out for. You'll get the least amount of noise using your camera's native ISO, and some cameras even have what they call dual native ISO, like the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K and 6K, and the Sony A7S III has something like that too, but they don't call it dual native for some reason. So why do we even still use ISO? All the research that I did led me to the conclusion that no one really knows. I just choose to realize that knowing 100 ISO using a Canon system might be different than using something like a Sony system or a Blackmagic system. This brings us back to the simple answer that ISO is at its core, and for most photographers, just sensor sensitivity. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video or if you got any value out of it, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you didn't like it or you thought it was total BS, go ahead and give it a thumbs down. I don't mind. Really, you can. If you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that bell icon so you're notified every time I publish a new video. That's it for this video, guys. See you in the next one.
This crystal is made up of a pattern of silver and bromine ions. The silver, denoted by Ag, bear a positive charge, and the bromine, denoted by Br, a negative. The significant detail about this crystal, which makes it a photographic value, is a tiny speck, S, known as the sensitivity speck.